Hi, in this video we are going to discuss about the approaches towards clustering. Speaking about clustering, we have two types of approaches. First we have agglomerative and then we have divisive. Okay. Agglomerative clustering is where we go from bottom to up, whereas from divisive clustering we come from up to bottom. Okay. This was something very vague. Let me describe. What we do when we start with agglomerative clustering, we consider each point as a different cluster. Okay, we consider that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We are having 8 clusters right now, and as we perform clustering, we start combining these points into larger clusters. Okay, for example, the dog example that we took here. Okay, to calculate the distance between two dogs. This is something this is something agglomerative. Okay, first we talked about one dog, then two dogs, then two dogs and a cat, then two dogs, cat and human, then trees. Okay, so basically we are considering every point as a cluster, and then we are approaching towards reducing the number of clusters. Okay, and all these figures, and at the end these are the clusters that we have formed. If we are talking about a diagram, then we have fishes. Now these are dolphins, then we have all different types of fishes. These fishes are obviously very different from each other, but when we are comparing them to amphibians and reptiles, they are very similar to each other. Similarly, we have vertebrates. All these vertebrates are very different from each other, but when we are comparing them with invertebrates, then they are all very similar to each other. Okay, so this is the approach that we have towards the agglomerative clustering. We go from the least level to the highest level, and this particular representation is what we call as a dendrogram representation. Okay, the other type of clustering that we have is divisive clustering. In this type of clustering, we have a top-down approach. What we do is we consider that all the points are in one cluster, and then we divide the cluster into separate parts. Okay, so this is the type of approach that we have in divisive. Basically, we are dividing the clusters, right? So it works by treating all the individual data points as a single cluster, and then splits those clusters into smaller groups, so that we have living organism that we split between animal and plants, then we vertebrates and invertebrates. That is how we do it. Okay, so the summary of our above discussion is we have two types of clustering, agglomerative and divisive. In the agglomerative clustering, the type of clustering that we have is hierarchical, which we are going to discuss, and for divisive we have k-means, which we are going to discuss in the next video. Okay, now there are some points about dendrograms. Before we end this video, let's discuss some of the points about dendrograms. The dendrograms is something that gives you a visual representation of a clustering algorithm. Okay, in the dendrogram you can actually see how two points are making a cluster. Okay, so this gives a very visual representation of cluster forming, and also it gives you information about the order in which the clustering has occurred. Okay, and they can also be used to decide the number of clusters that we are going to have. Okay, so we can have a threshold line. Okay, and we can specify that from the threshold line we can specify that these are the number of clusters that we want, and everything above this threshold line is ignored. We are not going to consider too high level clusters, but we are going to consider the clusters which have some specific information in them. All right, so that is what we can do using dendrograms. So this was about this video, and in the next video we are going to discuss about k-means clustering.